SVC Media.
Welcome to iGaming Daily, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe. Supported by SBC Summit Latino America, bringing together the leadership teams and product specialists from retail and online operators in Latin American markets.
Discover the potential of Latin America's booming iGaming and sports betting markets at SBC Summit Latin America, the premier industry event in the region. Join SBC at the Seminole Hard Rock Hotel and Casino in Miami from October 31st to November the 2nd. Register now at sbcevents.com.
Last December, the three parties forming Ireland's coalition government published the Gambling Regulation Bill 2022, settling on definitive terms needed to overhaul the Republic's near-century-old laws governing gambling under the Betting Act of 1931. As pledged, 2023 was marked as the year in which Ireland would finally launch its new gambling regime, to be governed by a dedicated government body and protecting its consumers via a national self-exclusion scheme. Though the government cites that terms are settled, concerns appear on legacy issues facing gambling in Ireland with regards to measuring problem gambling, consumer rights and the legal remit of its new governing body. I'm Martin Elliott and welcome to today's edition of iGaming Daily. Brought to you in partnership with SBC Summit Latino America. Now, on the last show, James's guest was Luis Figo. And while today's guests don't quite match that level of celebrity and glamour, I'm delighted to be joined by the Rui Costa of gambling industry journalism, Ted Menmuir, SBC's content director, and also by the man known as SBC's answer to Nuno Tavares, senior business journalist Ted Orme-Clay. Hi Ted, how are you doing?
Well, thank you. Great intro, Martin. Thanks a lot for that. I'll take Rui Costa.
Yeah. I don't say the second best thing on the internet after this particular edition of iGaming Daily is that compilation of all Rui Costa's Serie A goals. It's worth 11 minutes of anyone's time. That I can assure you. How about you, Ted? How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you, Martin. Very high praise indeed from you today. Cheers for that.
That's okay. So anyway, if we can sort of bring the topic back from Portuguese football to the actual topic in hand, which is the revision of the regulatory regime in Ireland. Ted, could you start by giving us an overview of what the sort of the most significant changes are within this bill?
Look, I think you got to go back to the beginning of the year, and the Irish government, especially the three coalition parties who had been examining and revising the bill over 3 years, finally settled definitive terms on what will be in the gambling regulation bill. And at the time, it was pointed that this would be, it was pledged that this would be actioned by 2023, and it was a guarantee. Now, since July, the bill has been stuck in Parliament. There have been amendments submitted on gambling protections. They're yet to settle on the terms of the advertising. And actually, they haven't provided kind of any more clarity on the actual role of the gambling authority that will be implemented in Ireland. They've got 3 months to pass the bill. It's at the moment, so Ireland, when it processes the law, it has 11 stages to go through. I think at the moment it's stuck in stage 4, according to the Utrecht's website, and there hasn't been an update since July, so it's not looking promising, in my opinion.
Okay, and what's your take on how things are going, Ted? And from obviously, I know you've read the regulation, the bill. In fact, it's not regulations yet. What do you see as the sort of the major points that would worry the operators and the industry in general?
Well, from the outset, the bill has been quite widely welcomed by some leading stakeholders in Irish betting and gaming. Flutter Entertainment being the key example there. They've put out a few statements saying that they're welcoming a regulation that's it's updating Ireland's regulatory framework, which, as you know, it is many decades old. I think in particular the creation of this new gambling regulatory authority has been quite widely welcomed. But regarding what might concern them, as Ted mentioned, it's a lot of stuff to do with advertising, I think, is probably the main area of concern. Some parts of the bill look to significantly reduce the visibility of betting in sports and in horse racing, which will have a potential to do that, which I think obviously a lot of operators are concerned about for quite obvious reasons. It will significantly reduce their marketing ability. This is also, from what I've seen, some reports in Irish media, has caused some concern among racing stakeholders who are understandably worried about the impact this could have on the revenue of the sport. And some people have talked about how this could even go further and affect the hospitality sector in general. So that really seems to be the main area. Also, obviously, there's potential for limitations and restrictions on promotions and inducements, which also obviously form quite a core part of a lot of operators' marketing and sort of promotional strategies. I think it's mainly with regards to those areas that I think they're going to cause a lot of worries among certain operators.
Yeah, that's interesting because it's a real stalwart of the regulatory debate, isn't it? The advertising restrictions, and these do appear to be quite tight. There's some going to be more limits on what you can do around sponsorships and so on. And then I believe the suggestion is no broadcast ads between 5:30 a.m. and 9 p.m., which is ruling out really much promotion during sporting matches on TV, and then with the end to the free bets and so on, that you're really clamping down on what operators can do to bring in new players and also, I guess, persuade customers to move from other operators as well. So that's an interesting point. What else, Ted, do you think are the big sticking points in, they've left that bill sort of trapped where it is in the Dáil with no significant progress in the last couple of months?
To understand what's happened in the regulatory development of Irish gambling, it's that the Irish government really hasn't touched gambling laws in near a century. And the process that has been undertaken is literally a rewrite of gambling within all aspects of the Irish government, with every agency having its input on how gambling should be regulated. So from top to bottom, you're talking about policing, criminality, the legalities, data protection, consumer rights. Every component's being revised, and that undertaking is, I think, even if you compare it to other European nations, is a much, much bigger endeavour than I think the government previously believed. Thus, you can understand why it's kind of why it's stuck in the Dáil, and just the level of kind of revision that needs to be undertaken for this to be processed by the end of the year.
So what you're looking at, essentially, is you're bringing this into bringing Ireland's gambling regulation and sector into the modern day, really, because you are very much looking at replacing legislation from the day when all you had was the high street and the on-course bookmaker, I guess. So it's an interesting change. And one of the things that I think is most interesting about it is that for the first time, they're setting up this gambling regulatory authority. Now, they've got as far as having a CEO designate in place, who's a very experienced civil servant called Anne-Marie Caulfield. There's still some doubts about exactly what the role of this regulatory body is going to be. So can you perhaps offer some ideas about where we are at the minute, where we sit at the moment in terms of what the new regulator will be doing?
Well, obviously, to start with, just to state the obvious, it'll provide just a single unified authority to oversee and monitor and enforce the licensing conditions for the national Irish market. Obviously, there's quite a significant development because I think the creation and existence and development of a national unified regulator is pretty much considered an essential for any modern, developed and well-regulated, well-established gambling market, which Ireland is. So this has been welcomed by a lot of as I said earlier, this has been welcomed by a lot of the stakeholders in the country, as well as by, I think, the European Gaming and Betting Association have put out some statements quite favourably about this. In regards to what it'll do, from what we understand at the moment, as you said, they've got a CEO, Marianne Caulfield, I believe. I hope I've not got her name wrong. The regulator will develop and publish standards for gaming machines and software. This will be effective in 6 months after its implementation, and it will issue both B2C and B2B licenses, as well as sort of generally enforce the licensing conditions of the market. So it's it's probably the most significant development out of the bill, really, with regards to the day-to-day operation of the Irish betting space. And I mean, obviously, I can't really describe it as anything other than a positive move, really.
And Ted, I noticed that in the last sort of amendments that came through on the bill, there's some talk of expanding this regulatory body's powers. I don't know if you can add anything about that.
Okay, so here again, these are kind of the conflicts of forming this kind of regulation. I mean, it is kind of a blank canvas of, taking a centuries-old industry with centuries-old legislation. How do you reform that? Now, there is a lot of ambiguity about where a kind of new regulatory body can be applied to Irish gambling. What should priorities be on the relaunch and revamp of a regime for Ireland? I think when we first saw the bill being published, it was very much focused on underage protections and licensing. But I think now, even from what we got this week, is that they want a greater focus on standards and also forming the policy on gambling protections and safer gambling duties. Again, but one of the things that it's yet unclear is who the actual authority will report to, which department in the Irish government, and what its relationship is going to be with other departments in other Irish departments who've got an interest in how gambling is undertaken.
Okay, and just there to build on something you mentioned there, Ted, which is player protection, because I think what we saw last week was a really worrying piece of research by the Economic and Social Research Institute, which concluded that 1 in 30 adults in Ireland suffers from problem gambling. That's roughly 130,000 people, I think. What sort of provisions does the bill already have in place for sort of problem gambling prevention and treatment?
The big one on this, I think, is the creation of I believe it's been put as a social impact fund, which will be taking mandatory payments from operators to fund research into problem gambling and excessive gambling, raising awareness of the issues around problem gambling and how to prevent it, and just generally looking to reduce or eliminate these overall rates, which, if this study is accurate, are quite high. It's quite interesting, really. I guess this kind of mirrors, I don't want to keep harking back to the UK's white paper too much on this podcast because we talked about it a million times, but it's very similar to the RET levy that we're having set up over here, I think. The idea of getting some mandatory funding from operators to fund this area. We also know that the kind of on the topic of what I've just talked about with the expanded powers of the regulator, that the regulator will be able to work with various sort of charities and other organisations like that on this area. And there's also some provisions in the bill for protection of minors regarding, making sure that children are prevented from participating in gambling or are employed in the industry, or really clamping down any of that. Another kind of parallel I could draw with the UK actually is I think lately there were some statements by James Brown, is it James Brown? Sorry guys, I may have got that wrong. Right, let me start that again. Another parallel I think we can kind of draw between the Irish regulatory developments and those that have been happening in the UK as well is that James Brown, the minister in charge of putting this legislation together and who proposed it to Parliament, has recently said that that problem gambling should be sort of framed as a public health issue, I believe, which is something that's been quite a focal point of the debate around gambling regulation in the UK of late as well.
I mean, again, Ireland suffers from hereditary issues in gambling. There's really, at a health service level, there's really kind of no reporting and no tracking of problem gambling and its impact on society and gambling harms too. Everything points to Ireland is really starting from a blank canvas on the major issues of regulating gambling within a modern context. So taking care of your consumers, what is their redress, what is their rights, also what access do they have to gambling controls, and finally what is in place for them. I mean, what is the duty of the gambling operator to protect the consumer? And in that, you've got to kind of fit these big pieces of the jigsaw, one of them being what is the definitive role of a new gambling authority and how does it supervise all these elements? So these are big technical questions that have to be ironed out by the government, because otherwise you're going to launch a new regime that has major leaks in that. And as you've seen in other... regulated gambling is hard. We've seen it across so many jurisdictions. But if you don't get the big hurdles right, it can all, it can all easily kind of just displace itself very quickly.
So we're in that familiar space that we've had this discussion across a number of markets in the last 18 months or so, where this regulation is really well intentioned, but a lot of details still to iron out. Is that a fair summary of where we are to conclude?
Yeah, I'd say so. I think that's pretty good overview of it, really, Martin.
Okay, and just one final question for you, for both of you. Do you expect to see this pass by the end of the year on schedule, or do you think there are too many hurdles to overcome and it's more important, or the politicians will decide it's more important to get it right first time rather than rushing it through?
Yeah, I think based on experience from other markets, I just think regulatory developments, regulatory overhauls always take a bit longer than the time frame that policymakers have to assign to it. So my guess would be sometime in 2024, personally.
And what do you think, Ted?
I'd start by saying, look, what Ireland have got right is, I think that they've got strong definitive terms for a foundation, a good platform to relaunch the regime. Where the kind of tri-coalition government, I think, needs to focus on is like, what is the vision of the market, right? How will that market grow sustainably and protecting its consumers effectively, and not just on the safer gambling levels, but in terms of your consumer protections, your consumer redress, and the kind of the operator servicing the customer. It shouldn't really matter if it comes in 2023 or early 2024. I think the players in the market are already there. It's just making sure that this is, bulletproof and watertight, and it's very important for Ireland, and it's a huge endeavour that they've undertaken. So, the industry should be supportive of that.
Okay, that's great. So All that remains for me to say now is thank you, Ted, and thank you, Ted, for your insights on this today. And hope you've enjoyed today's show, and come back again tomorrow for another episode of iGaming Daily. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of iGaming Daily, brought to you in conjunction with SBC Summit Latino America, being held at the Seminole Hard Rock Hotel and Casino in Miami on the 31st of October to the 2nd of November. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News Network. Happy reading.